Hello to those of you joining us live and those of you who may be joining us on catch up later. You are most welcome to our Breaking Barriers LinkedIn live series for Shape Talent. Shape Talent, an award-winning diversity, equity and inclusion consultancy which supports companies who are serious about working towards gender equality. And I am delighted to say that for today's LinkedIn Live, we have somebody from one such company, Lynn Bartholomew from Ericsson. Lynn is Head of Talent Management Networks at Ericsson. And Ericsson, obviously one of the world's leading information and communications technology companies, and a company it just so happens that we at Shape have worked with for many years because they share our vision of working towards gender equality. So Lynn, welcome.
Thank you, Rachel. So nice to be here.
And just to say, you are joining us from Stockholm, is that right?
Yes, from Stockholm, Sweden, where we actually have some sunshine today. So I'm really glad for that. It's been a very long and brutal and cold and grey winter.
It's always intriguing when I work with some of your colleagues when we're doing workshops and things. We often talk about what's the weather doing, and we've got people, all over the world. And generally, yes, people in Sweden are saying, yeah, it's been quite snowy, it's been quite cold.
Yeah.
But seeing as today's topic is all about the importance of flexible working options for gender equality, let's just find out about that. I'm at home, so I'm working flexibly. I'm thinking from your background that you're at home.
Yes, I am. Going into the office, we have the age-old struggle of trying to find meeting rooms. So on days like today, where I have a lot of calls with colleagues across the globe, it's definitely helpful to do those from home.
Yeah. And let me just put that out there for those listening. Let me find out, where are you? Are people working flexibly today? Because I suspect, obviously, we're seeing so much more of that. So hello, Sharon. Great to see Sharon, our founder, in the chat there. Let us know, let Lynn and I know if we are joined by you from home. We're both at home, or whether you are in the office today. Are you working flexibly or not? And what does flexibly mean to you, perhaps? We'll keep an eye on that because it's really nice to see where people are. But let's dive in then to the whole issue of flexibility and how that approach might well have an impact, particularly for women and gender equality. And Lynn, I guess the obvious place to start as we discuss this is the pandemic, because it drove so much of the change and the thinking about flexible working. So let's travel back in time for Ericsson when the pandemic hit. What were the kind of discussions and actions that took place at your end when you realized things were going to have to change?
Yeah, Rachel, it's amazing to actually go back to that time, because it kind of feels, I remember being so in it and feeling like actually this may never end. Like I couldn't imagine life after. And now that, it's amazing how resilient we are as human beings, and that kind of period feels quite in the past now. So I think Ericsson was very quick off the bat to recommend that all of us, including those of us in Sweden, where we didn't have, as everybody knows, the hard lockdown, we were really encouraged to work from home, and then eventually mandated to work from home. And that was done globally and consistently. And the rationale was very much around making sure that things like public transport were kept free and operational and safe for people who were critical workers. So that was kind of like the key message coming from our executive team, like, let's do this for safety. During that period of time, Ericsson also was amazing in offering facilities. So sort of, we could purchase desks, we could get chairs from the office, we could get extra monitors. So making sure that we were able to actually work in a safe and effective way at home. And, really kind of doing that in a way that logistically was possible, which, thinking that we have over 100,000 employees all across the globe, was quite something, actually. And definitely in those moments, it's a really good reminder of why Ericsson is a company that I've spent 16 years of my career with. This piece around humanness and empathy, including during those times. So then I think, as you know, the way that the globe responded to the pandemic was very different. And we in networks have sort of a base. Although we are spread very much across the globe, I would say our key hubs are Sweden, China, India, Mexico, Estonia, and Canada. So we're like really very different geographies with lots of different approaches to the pandemic, and also actually a lot of different kinds of work. So you have people on production sites. You also have quite a heavy R&D organization where maybe the requirements on how to work are different to a job like mine. I can do my job from anywhere and I'm not so impacted. Whereas for other colleagues in other roles, of course, the impact was more deeply felt.
Yeah. So it's really interesting actually hearing you reflect on that, because as you said, back in the pandemic, there wasn't much choice, particularly in a lot of countries where working from home was mandated, not everywhere. The imperative was keeping people safe.
Yeah.
Then, of course, what we've witnessed is, despite all of the pressures and the inconveniences, and for some people, the isolation of working from home, of course, we have seen that for many people, that flexibility offered something that they wanted to keep.
Yeah.
So bring us up to date, because you also made the very good point that for a company like Ericsson, working globally with different countries, different cultures, people, some of whom are easy to keep flexible, and other people who ideally need to be hands-on looking at equipment or research projects. So where are you now, given that you're handling lots of different demands and kinds of work and culture? You're also in a situation where we're also seeing that sort of pressure, I guess, generally in a lot of companies to get people back. So what's happening for Ericsson?
So I would say that we are taking a very considered and thought through approach to how we will manage hybrid in the future. What I would say is the flexibility is key. So that I imagine we will keep at the center of whatever approach that we take, and trying to understand what are the implications for people in this hybrid setup. So actually, even during COVID, we did 4 surveys throughout the period where we really kind of tried to understand from people, what do you need to be able to work from home? What is the impact on your well-being? What is the impact on Speak Up? Speak Up is one of our key sort of cultural priorities, and making sure that people still felt like they had a voice, even though they were working from home. And really importantly, what was the impact on connection? So using those inputs, Ericsson kind of, had lots of discussion around what was best. And again, trying to find one way to do things, landed on this 50-50 principle. So the expectation is that we are in the office 50% of our working time, and it is not mandated in respect of, we have so many different constellations of teams. We have teams that could be fully global. So, you might be a team of 10 located all around the world, and actually then the benefit of coming into a common meeting place is very different to if you and I were colleagues and we worked in the same office. So what happened was we put together like a workshop style documentation or support kit that managers could then run workshops with their teams to really try and understand what was best for the team. And off the back of that, even with the 50-50 principle, we have really left it up to managers and to local teams and local organizations to say, do what works best for you.
Yeah. I was just keeping an eye on the chat. By the way, I should say that we will have some time at the end. We normally go for about half an hour. We'll leave some time at the end for questions. So if you have questions from what they were saying, if you want to hear more about particular things we touch on, then please do put them in the chat. And in the chat as well, I can see that I think everybody is working from home today. So yeah, we can see how normal it's become. So let me lean into that, Lynn, that idea of, yes, 50-50, but how that is done is perhaps decided more at a local level. The consultation, I have a feeling as well that one of the consultations that you ran was around younger people, because of course, again, people experienced that the pandemic and indeed the flexibility of working very differently, perhaps depending on what generation they were in. And at Ericsson, you were mindful to hear from younger people whose experience might be different.
Yeah, we have an amazing organization or group of colleagues who are called our Next Generation Advisory Board. they tend to be relatively early in career, a group of 7 that go through a very fierce and competitive selection process every year. And coming out of that are then selected a really amazing, diverse group every single year. It's incredible to see. And they partner with our executive team for the period of a year working on strategic projects. So actually the executive team tasked them with having a look at what actually works best when it comes to productivity. So that was the very specific ask. And they did an amazing piece of research and analysis, and partnered with one of our R&D teams to really understand where you work and when you work, what is the impact on how you feel about how productive you are. And I would say the key finding that came from that has been shared back with our executive team is around intentionality. So being intentional around where you do the work that you do, not only as an individual, but also as a team. So again, coming back to when we look at our week ahead, what are the days that it may serve us better to be together as a team, be that virtually or in the same office, and which are the days that maybe we need to work in a different way that we could do at home. And here, Rachel, I would even say things like deep work. I think at one point, I certainly assumed like, okay, on the days that I really need to do deep work, I'm going to be at home so that nobody interrupts me. But I've noticed in myself that even that has kind of started to shift in a way. Like I almost prefer to be in the office on the days that I need to do deep work, so that I don't get distracted by anything at home, even though I have an empty home. So I think, it's such a personal thing, and it's a very emotive topic. So I would say we continue to watch the market and what other companies are doing as the space evolves. And for now, we really want to make sure that we take this a step at a time. We retain flexibility in the system, and that we make sure we create opportunities for people to come into the office, to meet new colleagues, to also understand our culture. I think for those colleagues who joined during COVID, that must have been a really lonely experience. Your onboarding was like getting a laptop shipped to you, having to go through like a whole lot of online tutorials about a company culture. And I think for a company like Ericsson that's almost 150 years old, one of our really, like the very special things about Ericsson is our culture. So to create a space for colleagues to actually come into the office and experience that culture and become part of that culture, I think is also important.
It's so fascinating as we're chatting, because we're seeing how many elements there are to the issue of flexibility and hybrid working. We've talked about productivity, connection, onboarding, balance, well-being, all of those kind of things. Obviously, what we are particularly interested in this conversation is about equality and how flexibility impacts on gender equality. So from your experience, Lynn, how do you see flexible working benefiting? Well, let's start with all genders, Ericsson, rather than going, we tend to always go, oh, this is all about supporting women. Actually, there's a case to say flexibility can work for lots of people, regardless of gender.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rachel. So I think, I mean, number one, just the commuting time. I think during COVID, we had a lot of colleagues who actually moved closer to their home states or their home towns, which has meant that the commuting distance has, if anything, increased. We have a lot of colleagues who also used to commute really long, like more than an hour and a half every single day one way. And for them, being intentional around what days to do that now is also helpful, but that also gives them time back. And so I would say, number one, the commuting time and just being flexible on that is enormously helpful. Secondly, being a global company, we have people, if I take it from a very kind of selfish perspective and being like in the central, European time zone, we have colleagues to the east and the west who are part of global teams. That means early starts for some and late finishes for others. And in that respect, I would say the flexibility is so necessary in order to be able to run our business, because we have colleagues who, really kind of part of global teams, they wouldn't be able to function working both the Central European time zones, or at least being able to stretch to that, as well as their own. So like that expectation about presence in an office or presence online is definitely not what it used to be. And there's a much greater respect for the fact that people need different flexibility at the start and the beginning of the day, especially for those who work at the more extremes on global teams. And finally, I would say that, in preparation for today's call, I had reached out to some colleagues in China and was asking them about this. And they were just saying, well, the flexibility there, at least for the Ericsson colleagues, has been really good, because traditionally the work that is seen more as like woman's work, taking care of the children, preparing things at home. Now the flexibility is much more acceptable across all genders. They've really noticed that there is that shift, that people can start to, there just isn't quite the same expectation that there has been previously, that one gender is more office-based and the other is more running things at home. And Sweden is very special in this regard. And I see it more and more where we have people saying things, of both genders, things like off home today, taking care of a sick child on their out of office. I remember when I first moved to Sweden and I saw that for the first time, I was kind of horrified, whereas now that's so commonplace and so normal. And also with our focus on well-being, I love that we do also see things like teams saying out of the office today, doing a team activity, taking care of ourselves. So again, that kind of flexibility in the system and really just becoming more like Ericsson acceptable, more part of our culture, I would say has been a shift that is really welcomed.
Yeah, and that's really interesting that that's happening across genders. It's becoming more acceptable for everybody to be able to say, actually, I've got a sports day, or I need to take my child to the dentist, or I've got an elderly parent who needs my attention this morning. I'll work the other end of the day, whatever it is. And specifically for women, why is flexible working for women at Ericsson then? Are you seeing that it's a particular benefit for women and the equality agenda?
Yeah, again, in preparation for this conversation, I was having a conversation with a colleague yesterday about this. And certainly in Networks, which is a big organization, we're around 30,000 people. We have seen since the start of COVID a definite increase in more women taking more senior job roles. So our focus is getting more women into decision-making roles. And here we haven't proved direct correlation between the two. And it's an interesting trend. So more women in more senior job stages over the last 3 years, which is really positive. And when I reflect on that, I think there's definitely moments in a woman's life that are different to a man's life, where having that flexibility really does serve us. And just a very small and quite personal example is that we run some coaching circles at Ericsson rooted in functional medicine for women in perimenopause and menopause. And they're small, intimate groups, maximum 10 women at a time. It's an 8-week program. And even there, where we have created this very strong sense of community and openness and sharing, there are days where some women, check in and say, are you okay if I keep my camera off today? I'm just not having a good day today. And I think expecting somebody, somebody who feels like that to then kind of get properly, I say properly, but to get dressed in a way to go to work and then have to be surrounded by people and be like on, that would be really tough. So again, the flexibility there to say like, today's a really tough day and I'm going to choose to work from home, I think is an important choice. And of course, there's other moments throughout a woman's life where I think we are impacted more biologically, and having that flexibility is really helpful.
Yeah. I'm really intrigued by that initial, and I know you said you haven't been able to do the data on it yet, but that initial feeling that women in more senior levels, that you're seeing that area of growth potentially because of flexibility. It reminds me actually that here at Shape, we've commissioned a white paper to look at the whole issue of flexible working and the impact on women. I think once the data starts to come out, that will be fascinating and allow for even more fruitful debate on this and policy making and so on. When we think about the the flexibility issue, obviously we tend to look at it as in terms of, well, what do employees want? What's good for well-being? Mental health, of course, a huge part of the agenda for many organizations now. But if we turn it the other way and think, well, how do we sell this to organizations? We are seeing some industry sectors or particular companies where we're seeing a resistance. So there comes a point where you have to say, well, what's the business case for flexible working? And what are you seeing at Ericsson? Because I think you had some interesting thoughts about how it might aid recruitment and retention.
Yeah, and I would say in some countries more so than others. So, I mean, in a country like Sweden, there's always been, a relative amount of flexibility, even pre-COVID. Whereas in some other countries, there's definitely, this is kind of like a new benefit, if you like. It's almost seen as a benefit versus something that employees are just automatically entitled to. So I would say that in some of the countries where we have big R&D sites or, a significant mass of employees, it is really helpful for us to have this more flexible approach. And saying to people 50-50, you contract what works for you and the team. And we know that's not applicable for all teams. There are definitely some roles, if you're part of a production site where you work a particular shift, if you're part of a network operations center, if you're within an R&D team that works on hardware, there's going to be exceptions to those rules. And there still will be elements of flexibility wherever possible to do things like the ones you just mentioned. If you have appointments outside of work that you need some flexibility on. So I would say in some countries, retaining an element of flexibility is definitely going to serve us in being a company that people choose to join and build a career in.
Yeah. Interesting as well. I'm just reflecting on what you were saying about, this is a wider question. It's not just an Ericsson question, but that issue of the fact that, of course, some jobs cannot be done flexibly, whether that's tech jobs where you're on a production line or whether that's caring jobs, not where Ericsson is, but people who go and work in care homes or shops and so on. Again, not necessarily a question for you, but other people in the chat might have some thoughts on this about how that affects gender equality and so on. The fact that some jobs are just harder to do flexibly, that's another interesting point of discussion. But I wonder then, going forwards, what feedback you're getting and how you're sort of collating data from women, whether you're measuring that or just anecdotally, how women at Ericsson are finding the changes that have happened, the move to 50-50. What are you hearing?
I mean, anecdotally, so I have been running some focus groups for women early in career who are working in technology roles and who really kind of, I guess, the word retaining is something that I really don't like. It almost feels like you're holding someone back, but retaining, but really kind of creating a company where people choose to build careers in technology is important to us. So having focus groups with women who are early in career that says, hey, what is it about Ericsson that you love? What is it that we can do more of? And what is it that makes you kind of choose to continue to stay here and build your career? And without fail, the topic of flexibility always comes up. No matter where the women are located, they so appreciate the flexibility because that isn't standard. And sure, it was for a short period of time. But I think time and time again, that topic of flexibility comes up. So it is a really important input for us when it comes to, really attracting and growing talents that we know, and especially with our diversity agenda. And here, that's not just about gender or generation, but really trying to be as inclusive as possible and recognizing that at different points in people's lives, they need different things from work, and trying to accommodate as many of those as possible while still acknowledging that there is an element of being together in the office that actually counts for something. Like we talked a little bit earlier, Rachel, around the culture, around like people who are new. I mean, my daughter is 19 and I kind of think sometimes of like her joining a corporation, and if it was purely virtual, like how do they learn?
Yeah, you don't get that osmosis of just being in an office and overhearing conversations and seeing what other people do and how they do it. Yeah, tricky.
Totally. And I mean, even for the work that I do, just being in the office and, bumping into somebody in the lift or whatever it is, it makes the work that we do so much easier, because I don't have to always, with intention, schedule time with people, because sometimes it's a 5-minute conversation. And somehow in Outlook, when we book things, it always ends up being 20 or 25 minutes. So I love those days that I go into the office, get lots of energy, get to meet the people that I need to. And I'm so grateful for the flexibility to choose to work at home on days like today, where it really works for me.
Yeah. I can see that the chat is getting busy, which is great. We're going to end in just a moment. So if you have a specific question for Lynn, then please do put that in the chat. But let me just dip in, because I can see some really insightful comments. Thanks, Juliet. Juliet, responding to my point about, perhaps some jobs are easier to do flexibly than others. Juliet saying, depends how you define flexible working. Jobs that require more of a full-time approach, you can do job shares, compressed hours. You might create 2 jobs out of one and spread the workload. Yeah, really, really interesting. Thanks, Juliet. That kind of innovative approach we all need to take. And Rachana was talking about perhaps the business case, why flexibility can work. Can also help from a cost efficiency perspective. An organization may not need as much real estate, as flexibility will also mean they need to factor in for office space for only a percentage of the workforce. Yeah, a lot of companies having to sit and think about their rental costs and how much space they're paying out for, and the flexibility of managing that. The hot desking that we're seeing a lot more of. Sorry, Lynn, were you going to add to that?
No, I was just going to build on what Rachna had said, and that we have done exactly that in Ericsson. So we have really kind of started to look at our property portfolio and see what makes sense. We have so much data on presence in the office, any particular peak days or any countries or any offices, so that we can also start to make decisions around, from a sustainability perspective, what makes sense? Like, where do we want to keep the lights on, and where do we really want to kind of downsize and make sure that, because again, going into an office when there's only a handful of you is actually quite depressing. So making sure that where we do keep the space, that it is a space that people actually come to and enjoy, and that the facilities are really good also.
Yeah. Thank you for those comments. I'm keeping an eye, and please, if you're watching the replay, Lynn, myself, the Shape Talent team will of course be stuck into those comments as well, and be replying to them. So even if you're not live with us, please do add any comments or questions, because we would love to pick those up. Please do connect with Lynn and myself, or any other members of the Shape Talent team if diversity, equity and inclusion is something that you and your organisation are interested in. All that remains really is for me, because I'm looking at the time, to say a huge thank you, Lynn, for giving up your time. Just a final thought from you, perhaps, as we're thinking about flexible working and gender equality. How optimistic are you looking into the future from here?
I think if you had have asked me 6 months ago, I would have had a very different answer. I think 6 months ago, I kind of felt like the change had been dramatic enough that it was like a true shift in how we worked. That working from home, hybrid flexibility was here to stay. And now I really see that tide is turning. So there is definitely, and I don't think we're far enough into the journey to see what is really driving it. Is like a need for control? Is it just because it's our place of comfort and it's what we know? But reading the news, watching the media, seeing what other companies are doing, there's definitely this feeling that decisions are being made to get us back into the office more and more. So my optimism is mixed, I would say. I really do hope that we are all able to retain an element of flexibility at the very least, where people can choose where to do the work they do and when to do the work they do. And recognize that there is some importance in having a common meeting place where we can still come together and get to see each other, have human connection, and also importantly, understand the culture of the organization we're part of.
Yeah. really honest answer, and I really appreciate that. And it just goes to show it's a great place to wrap up, actually, that this is still such an important conversation, one that we all are invested in and want to be a part of, because it's not simple. Nuance to it, and companies like Ericsson, for example, with 100,000 plus people in many different countries, this is a discussion that is live and important, and we're really grateful. Lynn, sorry, the little noise is off on my computer, throwing me off, but really grateful that you have taken time today to kind of have part of that conversation, to share your insights. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you for the work that you at Shape Talent do. I must say it's a partnership that we're so grateful for. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here today.
We're delighted, and we always enjoy working with Ericsson. And just to say, as we finish this, we're doing these monthly, our LinkedIn Lives on all issues of gender equality, aimed at people who work in that space, who want to contribute to the conversation, who want to hear about best practice, what other organizations are doing, what research is out there. Next month, on the 23rd of May at 10 o'clock, there'll be plenty about it on LinkedIn. We'll be talking to Nadia Nagamutu, who runs Avenir Consulting. She's just published a book called Beyond Discomfort: Why Inclusive Leadership is So Hard. And she'll be drawing on some of that to talk about leading in the gender equity space. The fact that it can be uncomfortable and challenging. So do join us for that, and do catch up on our three previous LinkedIn Lives. Male allyship we talked about was International Women's Day, worth it and making progress. And we talked about barriers to women's progression, particularly in the STEM industry. So loads for you to catch up on. And we hope to see you again next month. So from Lynn and from me and the Shape Talent team, thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you again next time. Cheerio. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.